My son wrote, "Don't expect me to take care of you in old age. I have my own life and family." I calmly replied, "Okay," and rewrote my will. When he found out about this, he burst into my house, and I'm glad you're here with me. Please like this video and listen to my story till the end, and let me know which city you're listening from. That way I can see how far my story has traveled. I don't believe that anymore. Because at 7:18 on a quiet Tuesday morning, one single message erased 32 years of motherhood in less than 10 seconds. I was standing in my kitchen, holding a warm mug of coffee, watching the sun creep through the window my late husband installed with his own hands. The house was quiet, peaceful, the kind of silence you earn after a lifetime of doing everything right. Or so I thought. My phone buzzed. My son's name lit up the screen. I smiled. When you're a mother, you never outgrow that reflex, the automatic warmth, the hope that the message will be a photo of your grandchildren, a joke, or even just a thinking of you. Instead, I read this: "Don't expect me to take care of you when you're old. I have my own life and family." No emojis, no explanation, no argument before it. Just that. I read it again, then again. My hand started to shake, not dramatically, just enough that the coffee rippled in the cup. That's how betrayal arrives sometimes. Quiet, casual, as if the person sending it doesn't realize they've just detonated something irreversible. I'm Margaret. I'm 71 years old. I run 3 miles most mornings. I pay my bills early. I don't ask for help unless it's absolutely necessary. I buried my husband 5 years ago without falling apart because someone still had to hold things together. And apparently, in my son's mind, I had become a future inconvenience. There had been no warning signs, no fights, no distance. We had dinner 3 days earlier. He hugged me goodbye, told me the drive safe. So I stood there in my kitchen asking myself the question every parent dreads. When did my child stop seeing me as his mother and start seeing me as a liability? I could have replied with anger, with guilt, with explanations I didn't owe. I didn't. I sat down at the table, let the silence settle, let the truth sting properly. Then I typed 2 words: "Okay." That was it. No follow-up, no argument, no plea, just acceptance. What my son didn't know, what he couldn't have known, was that in that moment, something inside me snapped into clarity. Not rage, not heartbreak. Resolve. If he had his own life, then I would reclaim mine, fully, finally, and without apology. And what I did next would change everything he thought he was entitled to. But the real shock wasn't what I took away, it was what I finally saw. Because sometimes the most dangerous thing a child can say is the truth. But what happened when my son realized okay didn't mean surrender, it meant strategy, is where this story truly begins. Before we continue, make sure you're subscribed to this channel. Stories like this don't just entertain, they expose truths about family, money, and self-respect that too many people learn too late. Subscribe now so you don't miss what comes next. After I sent that single word, okay, I didn't cry. That surprised me. I expected grief to knock the wind out of me. Instead, what settled in was something colder, steadier. Awareness, the kind that arrives when denial finally packs its bags and leaves. I rinsed my mug, wiped the counter, folded the dish towel the way I always had. Life didn't stop just because my son had revealed how he saw me, but my thinking changed instantly. For 32 years, I had lived under an unspoken assumption that love, loyalty, and family naturally flowed both ways, that sacrifices were remembered, that support created bonds, not expectations. That illusion died with that text. My husband, Richard, and I had built a modest but secure life in Portland. No extravagance, no shortcuts. We saved diligently, invested conservatively, paid off our home early. When Richard passed suddenly from a heart attack, everything transferred to me: the house, the retirement accounts, the pension. It wasn't wealth that turned heads, but it was stability. And stability, I was beginning to understand, can be just as tempting as riches. Our son had always been present: birthday calls, holiday visits, Sunday dinners with his wife and kids. He never demanded anything outright. That's the part that fooled me. The requests came wrapped in stress: a temporary loan, a family emergency, a one-time thing. I helped because I wanted to, because that's what mothers do, because I believed generosity was an investment in love. Now I wondered if it had been training instead. That afternoon, I made a phone call I hadn't planned on making. "Thomas, it's Margaret." He had been my attorney for years, steady, unassuming, the kind of man who listened more than he spoke. "I need to review my estate documents," I said. There was a pause. "Is something wrong?" "No," I replied calmly. "Something is finally clear." We scheduled a meeting for later that week. When I hung up, I felt lighter, not relieved, just unburdened, as if I had been carrying an invisible weight labeled expectations and had finally set it down. I spent the next 2 days thinking, really thinking, about what I wanted my life to mean when I was gone. Who had shown up without an agenda? Who gave without asking? What causes mattered to me beyond bloodlines? The answers came easier than I expected. What I didn't know, what I couldn't know, was that my son still had access to an old joint account we'd opened years earlier just in case. And when he saw the payment to my attorney, that's when calm turned into panic. Not mine, his. Because the moment my son realized I was making legal moves without him, he stopped pretending and showed me exactly what he was afraid of losing. Before we go further, I want to hear from you. Have you ever felt taken for granted by someone you sacrificed everything for? Or have you witnessed family change the moment money entered the conversation? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Your perspective matters here. The phone rang the evening after my meeting with Thomas. I stared at the screen for a moment before answering. My son's name glowed back at me, impatient, demanding, a far cry from the affectionate check-ins I used to receive. "Mom," he said the second I picked up, skipping any greeting, "why are you meeting with a lawyer?" There it was. No concern, no curiosity, just control. "I'm updating some paperwork," I replied evenly. "It's routine." "You don't make changes like that without talking to me." The entitlement in his voice landed harder than the text message ever had. "Actually," I said, "I do." Silence followed. Thick, uncomfortable silence. Then a sharp exhale. "After everything I've done for you?" he snapped. "I've been there. I've helped you." I almost laughed. "Helped me how?" I asked. He hesitated. Just a fraction of a second, but I noticed. "I mean, emotionally, family stuff, you know." "I live alone," I said. "I manage my finances. I take care of my home. What exactly are you referring to?" His irritation escalated. "This isn't about that. You're being unreasonable." "No, I was being inconvenient." The conversation ended abruptly. He hung up first. That night, I sat at my desk and pulled out my financial records, something I hadn't done in years. Not because I avoided it, but because I trusted the story I'd been telling myself. As I added numbers, my stomach tightened. Small transfers here, larger ones there, each justified by urgency, each framed as temporary. When I totaled everything, the number startled me. Nearly $50,000 over 4 years. I sat back in my chair, stunned. Medical bills that were never explained. Emergencies that quietly resolved themselves. Crises that always seemed to fade right after I wired money. I wasn't angry yet. I was embarrassed. Had I been helping, or had I been funding a lifestyle built on my silence? The next morning, Thomas called. "Margaret," he said carefully, "before we proceed, I need to ask something. Has anyone been pressuring you about your finances?" I didn't answer right away. "Yes," I said finally, "but not the way people expect." We talked through options: living trusts, asset protection, documentation, safeguards. "This may get messy," he warned. "I know, but I'm done being careless." That afternoon, my son called again. This time, he wasn't angry. He was afraid. And fear, real fear, has a way of revealing motives people work hard to hide. Because the next words out of my son's mouth made it painfully clear. He wasn't worried about losing me. He was worried about losing access. Before we continue, I want to ask you something, and be honest with yourself. When someone panics about your decisions, are they afraid for you or afraid of losing control? Tell me in the comments what you think, because this next moment changed everything for me. When my son called again that afternoon, his tone was completely different. Gone was the sharp edge. Gone was the authority. What replaced it was something softer, shaky, almost rehearsed. "Mom, are you okay?" There it was, the performance. "I'm fine," I said. "Well, I mean, you've just been making a lot of sudden decisions, closing accounts, moving things around. It's not like you." Not like the version of me he relied on. "I've had time to think," I replied, "that's all." He sighed. "You know I worry about you, right? People your age can be vulnerable, scams, bad advice." I almost admired the pivot. "So now you're worried about my judgment?" I asked calmly. No, that's not what I meant," he rushed. "I just think these things should be discussed as a family." Family. The word felt heavier than it used to. "Funny," I said quietly, "you didn't think family discussion was necessary when you told me not to expect care from you." Silence. Then defensiveness. "I told you I was stressed. You're holding on to one text and blowing it out of proportion." One text can reveal a lifetime of truth, especially when it's honest. His voice dropped. "What exactly are you changing, Mom?" There it was. Not why, not how I felt, not whether I was hurt. What? "I'm protecting myself," I said. "From me?" he scoffed. "I didn't say that, but your reaction is telling." The call ended with tension thick enough to choke on. That night, I couldn't sleep. Not because I doubted my decision, but because I finally understood what I was dealing with. This wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a power shift. For years, I had unknowingly played a role in a system where my generosity was expected, monitored, and quietly depended on. And the moment I stepped outside that role, the panic set in. The next day, I went to the bank. I closed the old joint account, opened a new one at a different institution, transferred only what I needed for daily living. The banker looked at me carefully. "Everything okay?" "Yes," I said. "I'm choosing peace." By the end of the week, the trust paperwork was ready. My home, my investments, my savings, all protected, all intentional. And my son's name? Nowhere. I signed with a steady hand. No anger, no guilt, just clarity. That evening, my phone lit up again. This time, I didn't answer, because I knew what was coming next. Fear had already spoken, and desperation was about to scream. Before we continue, take a moment to subscribe. This story isn't just about family conflict, it's about boundaries, self-respect, and the cost of staying silent too long. Subscribing helps these stories reach the people who need them most. It was a Saturday morning when I heard tires screech into my driveway. Not pull in, screech. I was in my garden, pruning roses, dirt on my hands and peace in my chest, a peace I had worked hard to reclaim. The sound shattered it instantly. A car door slammed, fast footsteps, angry ones. I didn't even have time to stand up before my son burst through the gate. "What did you do?" he shouted. I stayed where I was, slowly set my shears down, looked up at him like he was a stranger who had lost his way. "Lower your voice," I said. "The neighbors can hear you." "I don't care." His face was flushed, eyes wild. "The bank told me everything's gone. The accounts, the investments. Mom, where did the money go?" The word "my" never crossed his lips. It's protected, and it's not your concern. That did it. He stepped closer, towering over me like intimidation might reset reality. "That money was supposed to be mine," he said. "Dad worked his whole life for that." "So did I said, standing now, meeting his stare. "And your father worked for us, not for your future entitlement." "You can't do this," he snapped. "I'll challenge it. I'll prove you're not thinking clearly." The threat hung in the air, ugly and unmistakable. I felt something surprising then. Not fear, clarity. "Try," I said calmly. "I have medical records, legal witnesses, documentation, and your text message." His face drained of color. "You don't understand," he said through clenched teeth. "We need that money." We. There it was. "For what?" I asked. "What do you need it for so badly?" He didn't answer, and that silence told me everything. "Leave," I said quietly. "This is still my home." He stormed out, slamming the gate behind him. I stood there long after the sound of his car faded, my hand shaking, not because I regretted standing up to him, but because I finally understood how long this had been building. This wasn't sudden. This was calculated. That afternoon, I called Thomas. "He threatened me," I said, "and he's desperate." Thomas didn't sound surprised. That usually means there's more under the surface. We need to document everything. So I did. Dates, calls, words, visits. Because when someone believes they're entitled to your life's work, they don't let go easily. And I knew, deep down, this confrontation wasn't the end. It was the beginning of something far uglier. Because when threats failed, my son tried something far more dangerous and far more personal. The calls didn't stop after that Saturday. They changed. No more shouting, no more accusations. Instead, concern appeared, polished, calculated concern. My son called 3 days later, voice low and measured, like he was speaking to a fragile stranger instead of the woman who raised him. "Mom, I've been thinking about what happened," he said. "I'm worried about you." I closed my eyes. "Worried about what?" I asked. "You've been isolating yourself, making big financial decisions alone, closing accounts, moving assets. That's not healthy." Not healthy. The words landed exactly how he intended them to. "I'm 71, I said calmly, not confused, not incapable, just independent. He sighed, like a man burdened by responsibility. "I think we should get a professional involved," he said, "just to make sure everything's okay." That's when I realized this wasn't emotional anymore. It was tactical. That afternoon, a letter arrived from a law firm I didn't recognize, not from Thomas, from my son's attorney. They were questioning my mental capacity, suggesting diminished judgment, requesting a psychiatric evaluation. I sat at my kitchen table, reading it slowly, my heart pounding, not from fear, but from disbelief. He wasn't trying to talk to me anymore. He was trying to take control of me. I called Thomas immediately. "He's escalating," I said. "He's trying to declare me incompetent." Thomas exhaled. "I expected this, but Margaret, this only works if you're unprepared, and you're not." We moved fast. Medical records gathered, witness statements prepared, every decision documented with dates, reasons, and proof. I agreed to the evaluation on one condition: we choose the doctor. 3 days later, I sat across from a forensic psychiatrist who specialized in elder competency cases. She asked about my life, my finances, my relationships, my reasoning. 3 hours later, she closed her notebook. "Mrs. Morrison," she said gently, "you are cognitively sharp, financially literate, and fully capable of making your own decisions." I felt something loosen in my chest, but she wasn't finished. "Off the record," she added, leaning forward slightly, "what you're experiencing is a form of financial pressure. It's more common than people realize. Adult children panicking when parents reclaim autonomy." Someone finally named it: control disguised as concern. The court date was set, and for the first time since that text message, I saw the path clearly. My son wasn't protecting me. He was protecting his expectations, and I was done carrying them. But the courtroom didn't just expose his motives, it forced him to answer for the one message he thought I'd forget. The courtroom was colder than I expected. Not physically, emotionally. Old wood benches, fluorescent lights, the quiet tension of people waiting to have their lives dissected by strangers in robes. I sat beside Thomas, my hands folded neatly in my lap, my posture steady. I wasn't there to perform. I was there to be seen as I truly was. Across the aisle sat my son. He wouldn't look at me. That hurt more than I thought it would. His attorney spoke first, painting a careful picture: a grieving widow, isolated after her husband's death, suddenly making radical financial decisions without consulting family. He used words like erratic, influenced, concerning. I listened calmly. When he suggested early cognitive decline, I felt something snap. Not inside me, but between us. A final thread of trust breaking clean in two. Then Thomas stood. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't dramatize. He presented facts. Medical records showing perfect health. Financial documents demonstrating consistent, logical decision-making. A clear timeline of events, including the exact moment everything changed. "And finally," Thomas said, turning toward the judge, "we submit Exhibit C." My son stiffened. The judge adjusted her glasses. "Exhibit C?" Thomas read it aloud. "Don't expect me to take care of you when you're old. I have my own life and family." The courtroom went still. The judge looked up sharply. "Mr. Morrison," she said, "did you send this message?" My son swallowed. "Yes, Your Honor, but I was upset. It was taken out of context." "Out of context?" she asked. "What context makes that statement appropriate?" He opened his mouth, closed it. Nothing came out. The judge turned to the psychiatrist. "Doctor, based on your evaluation, is Mrs. Morrison competent to make her own financial decisions?" "Completely," she replied without hesitation. "Above average, in fact." The judge nodded once, then looked directly at my son. "It appears," she said, "that Mrs. Morrison responded logically to a boundary you yourself established. You stated you would not provide care. She adjusted her estate planning accordingly." She paused. That is not incompetence. That is cause and effect. Her gavel struck. Petition denied. Just like that. My son's shoulders slumped. His attorney gathered papers quickly, avoiding my eyes. Jessica wasn't there, and suddenly I understood why. As we stood to leave, my son finally looked at me. The expression wasn't sadness, it was rage. He hissed in the hallway, grabbing my arm. Thomas stepped between us instantly. "Let go of her now." My son released me, leaning in close. "When you're old and alone, don't come looking for me." I looked at him, really looked. "I won't be alone," I said quietly, "but you might be." And then I walked away. I thought the courtroom was the end, but losing control made my son desperate, and desperation makes people dangerous. For a few weeks after the hearing, everything went quiet. No calls, no letters, no surprise visits. That silence should have felt like relief. Instead, it felt like the calm before something ugly. I stayed alert, documented everything, changed routines slightly, not out of fear, but awareness. When someone loses in public, they rarely accept it privately. 3 weeks later, on a Sunday morning, I heard laughter in my driveway. Children's laughter. My stomach dropped. I opened the door to see my grandchildren standing there, holding a small container of cookies. Behind them stood my son and his wife, smiling too brightly. "We thought we'd surprise you," she said sweetly. "The kids missed their grandma." Charlie ran forward and hugged me. "Mommy said you weren't feeling good." That was the moment I knew. They weren't here for reconciliation. They were here with leverage. I let them inside because I had no choice, not without hurting 2 innocent children. They settled into my living room like nothing had happened. Coloring books appeared, cookies were laid out. The scene was carefully staged. After 20 minutes of painful small talk, my son leaned forward. "We want to apologize," he said quietly. "I shouldn't have sent that message." I waited. "For what exactly?" I asked. He hesitated. His wife jumped in. "For hurting your feelings, for things getting out of hand." Not for the threat, not for the manipulation, not for trying to take my autonomy. When the children stepped outside to play, the tone changed instantly. "You're being vindictive," his wife snapped. "You have more money than you'll ever need, and you're punishing your own family." "Name one thing you've done for me that wasn't tied to my money." Silence. Then the threat came. "If you don't reverse the trust," my son said quietly, "you won't see the kids again." There it was, the line they believed would force my surrender. I felt sick, furious, heartbroken, but I didn't waver. "Get out, and if you ever use those children as weapons again, I'll make sure a judge knows exactly what kind of parents you are." They left in a fury, dragging the children with them. I stood in my doorway shaking, not because I was weak, but because I had just chosen dignity over fear, and I knew there would be consequences. Because when emotional blackmail failed, they turned to something far more dangerous, the legal system. The lawyer's letter arrived on a gray Tuesday morning, not by email, not by voicemail, by certified mail, the kind meant to intimidate before you even open it. I sat at my kitchen table, hands steady, and read every word carefully. They were requesting an independent psychiatric evaluation, claiming concerns about my mental fitness, and alleging that my recent financial decisions may have been made under undue influence or diminished capacity. I almost smiled. So this was the new plan. If guilt didn't work, if threats didn't work, if children as leverage didn't work, they tried to erase me. I called Thomas immediately. "They're going for incompetency," I said. "Again." Thomas was calm, almost reassuringly so. "Margaret," he said, "this isn't strength, it's desperation, and desperation leaves a paper trail." We agreed to the evaluation on our terms. I wasn't afraid of scrutiny. I welcomed it. A week later, I sat across from another specialist, this one court-appointed. She was thorough, exhaustive, impossible to manipulate. She tested memory, logic, financial comprehension, decision-making. She reviewed years of medical records, interviewed my primary doctor, asked detailed questions about my trust, my reasoning, my long-term planning. At the end, she closed her folder and said plainly, "There is no evidence of impairment. In fact, your reasoning is remarkably sound." 2 weeks later, we were back in court. This time, my son looked different, thinner, more rigid, angry in a way that no longer tried to hide itself. His attorney argued harder, pushed further, implied malice instead of confusion. But facts don't bend. The judge reviewed both evaluations, reviewed the documentation, reviewed the text messages again. Then she looked directly at my son. "You are not concerned about your mother's well-being," she said. "You are concerned about losing financial access." Her gavel came down. Petition denied. Any further filings of this nature may be considered harassment. That word, harassment, landed like a verdict far heavier than I expected. As we left the courtroom, my son didn't follow, didn't threaten, didn't shout. He just stared. And for the first time, I saw something that frightened me more than rage. I saw calculation, because when people realize they can't win, they start planning how to survive the loss. 3 weeks later, I found out exactly what he'd been planning. The bank called. My son had missed multiple mortgage payments. Foreclosure notices were being prepared, and I was still listed, conveniently, as an emergency contact. That's when the truth finally surfaced. They hadn't just wanted my money. They had already spent it in their minds, and now the illusion was collapsing. But what I uncovered next, the debts, the lies, and the paper trail, revealed just how long this betrayal had been in motion. When the bank called, I didn't panic. I thanked the representative politely, asked a few neutral questions, and ended the call. Then I sat very still in my kitchen, staring at the wall clock as it ticked away the last pieces of denial I hadn't realized I was still holding. Missed mortgage payments don't happen overnight. They're the result of months, sometimes years of bad decisions. I called Thomas. "They're in financial trouble," I said. "Real trouble." There was a pause. "Margaret," he replied carefully, "would you like to know how deep it goes?" I did. 2 days later, I sat in Thomas's office reviewing a report prepared by a private investigator, a retired detective who specialized in financial abuse cases. What I read made my hands go cold. Luxury vacations charged to credit, a boat purchased and barely used, private school tuition they couldn't afford, cosmetic procedures, country club memberships. They weren't struggling. They were living beyond their means, confidently. Why? Because they believed my estate was guaranteed. Then came the part that broke something inside me. They had taken out loans against my expected inheritance. Multiple lenders, multiple signatures, all based on the assumption that I would die soon and obediently. And the most chilling detail, emails, years old. My son had contacted an estate attorney asking about accelerating inheritance when parents became difficult. The attorney refused, but the inquiry existed. This wasn't reactive, it was premeditated. I closed the folder slowly. "Do you want to press charges?" Thomas asked quietly. "There's enough here for fraud, possibly elder exploitation." I imagined my grandchildren visiting their father in prison, courtrooms, headlines. "No," I said, "I don't want revenge, but I did want clarity. I want them to know," I added. We drafted a letter, not emotional, not threatening, unbreakably factual. It outlined everything: the debt, the loans, the emails, the manipulation, the legal failures, and it made one thing unmistakably clear: there would be no bailout, no rescue, no inheritance, no more access. But there was one final line, one door left unlocked, not to my money, but to my humanity. Because when they received that letter, their response wasn't anger, it was collapse. 3 weeks passed after the letter. No calls, no threats, no legal notices, just silence. But this silence felt different from the others. This one wasn't strategic, it wasn't performative. It was hollow. Then, 2 days before Christmas, there was a knock at my door. Not loud, not angry, tentative. When I opened it, my breath caught. My grandchildren stood there in winter coats, holding hands, and beside them was a woman I didn't recognize. My son's car was parked across the street, engine running. The woman introduced herself as a court-appointed supervisor. That's when I understood. They had lost the house. Bankruptcy proceedings, relocation, mandatory oversight. This visit wasn't a choice. It was a requirement. I welcomed the children inside, my heart breaking and healing at the same time. We baked cookies, read stories, sat on the floor coloring while snow drifted past the windows. For 2 hours, I was just Grandma again. When it was time to leave, Charlie hugged me tightly. "Can we come back?" he asked. "Anytime," I whispered. The supervisor nodded. The court has approved ongoing supervised visits. After they left, I sat alone in my living room, the house quiet but no longer empty. I didn't feel victorious. I felt resolved, because justice doesn't always feel good. Sometimes it just feels final. In the weeks that followed, I heard pieces of the aftermath through others. My son lost his business. His wife took a retail job. The lifestyle collapsed as quickly as it had been built. But I didn't celebrate. I focused on living. And for the first time in years, my life belonged to me. But what came next surprised even me, because the end of their control marked the beginning of something I never expected to find. Spring arrived quietly that year, not with drama or announcements, just soft mornings, pale blossoms, and a sense that something heavy had finally lifted. For the first time since my husband passed, the future didn't feel like something to brace against. It felt open. I returned to my morning runs, 3 miles at a steady pace, breathing in air that felt cleaner than it had in years. My doctor laughed during my annual checkup and told me I had the heart of someone much younger. "What are you doing differently?" she asked. "I stopped carrying other people's expectations," I replied. I joined a book club, a group of women ranging from their 50s to their 80s, all with stories of their own. We talked about novels, sure, but we also talked about boundaries, grief, and the strange freedom that comes when you stop trying to please everyone. I started volunteering at the Children's Hospital, one of the beneficiaries of my trust. I read stories to kids waiting for treatment, held hands with parents who needed a moment to breathe, and rediscovered a sense of purpose that had nothing to do with obligation. This was legacy, not names on a will, but lives touched while I was still here. My niece visited often. We grew closer, not out of duty, but choice. She never asked for anything, never hinted. She just showed up, and that meant everything. The supervised visits with my grandchildren continued monthly. They were different now, structured, limited, but real, and real was enough. I stopped waiting for apologies that weren't coming. I stopped rehearsing conversations that would never happen. Instead, I lived. And that's when I realized something important. Walking away from manipulation doesn't leave a void, it makes room. But peace has a way of attracting attention, and just when I thought the story was over, the past tried to knock one last time. It happened on an ordinary afternoon. No warning, no dramatic buildup, just a phone call I almost didn't answer. I recognized the number immediately. My son. I let it ring twice before picking up. "Mom," he said quietly. No anger, no edge, just exhaustion. I didn't respond right away. "I'm not calling for money," he added quickly. "I know you won't help us. I need to ask you something." I stayed silent. "Do you really believe I never loved you?" The question caught me off guard, not because it was convincing, but because it revealed how empty everything else had become for him. "I believe you loved the version of me that made your life easier," I said gently, "and you resented the version of me that needed respect." He exhaled shakily. "We didn't think it would end like this." "That's because you thought it was guaranteed," I replied. Another pause. "I don't know how to fix this," he said. For years I had waited to hear words like that, but hearing them now felt different, less like hope, more like acknowledgement. "I can't fix what I didn't break, and I won't rebuild a relationship on guilt or fear." "So that's it?" he asked. "No," I said. "That's the beginning. If you ever want a relationship that isn't tied to money, control, or expectations, I'm here." He didn't respond, but for the first time, he didn't argue either. We hung up without anger, without promises, just truth. And I realized something then. Closure doesn't always come with reconciliation. Sometimes it comes with clarity. And in the end, one final decision would define my legacy, not in money, but in meaning. People assume the end of a story like mine is loud. A final confrontation, a dramatic apology, a door slammed forever. But real endings are quieter. They arrive in ordinary mornings, steady routines, and the calm certainty that you no longer owe anyone an explanation. It's been over a year now. My life is full in ways it never was when I was trying to keep everyone else comfortable. I wake up early, lace my shoes, and run while the city is still half asleep. I volunteer twice a week. I paint again, badly, joyfully, without caring who approves. Peace, I've learned, is not the absence of conflict. It's the absence of fear. The trust remains exactly as I designed it, not out of spite, not as punishment, but as intention. Students who never would have afforded school are getting degrees. Children in hospital rooms are laughing through pain. Animals abandoned by the world are being cared for. That's where my life went, not into someone else's expectations. As for my son, we exist in a careful distance, no rage, no closeness, just reality. We speak occasionally, briefly. There are no demands anymore, only restraint. And that tells me everything. My grandchildren are still part of my life, slowly, carefully, with boundaries that protect all of us. They don't know the full story yet, and that's okay. When they're old enough, they'll receive letters I've written for them, letters that don't accuse, letters that don't justify, letters that explain. That love without respect becomes control. That money without gratitude becomes entitlement. That family is not ownership. I don't regret my choice. I regret only how long it took me to believe I was allowed to make it. If you're listening to this and wondering whether setting boundaries makes you cruel, it doesn't. If you're afraid that choosing yourself will make you lonely, it won't. What it does is filter your life down to what's real. And real, I've discovered, is enough. I didn't leave behind wealth for someone who waited for my absence. I left behind meaning while I was still here. And that is the kind of legacy no one can take from you.